Today, my guest is Dr. Peter Lovatt, aka Dr. Dance. He spent 2 decades working in university research labs and lecturing. In 2008, Peter set up his first dance psychology lab, from where he studied how movement changes the way people think and solve problems. In 2012, he made a full-length TV pilot for UK's Channel 4 called Dr. Dance. And in 2016, he made Dr. Happy for the A&E network in the USA. He teaches courses in dance psychology at the Royal Ballet School. He is the co-founder of the Movement in Practice Academy, which is a specialist provider of education in the psychology of movement and dance. And his newest book is called The Dance Cure. It's been out in the UK since 2020 and is being published in the USA. Peter, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
I hope I did you justice in the little bio that I read out about you, and probably missed out a lot because you've done so much.
Well, no, it was very nice. Thank you very much. You covered all the bases there.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. Now, Peter, I know from following you on social media that you have actually recently been diagnosed with bowel cancer. And I know you've had your operation and you seem to be on your road to recovery now. And I know that you use dance all the way through to help you, to make you fitter, stronger, and as part of your recovery. So I'm really interested to hear about that.
Well, thank you. Getting the diagnosis of cancer was a real shock. And getting that diagnosis during lockdown was terrifying because I went in and I had virtually no symptoms. And I wasn't expecting to get a diagnosis of bowel cancer. And so when I went in and the doctor told me, he said, look, it's really important that for what lies ahead, and I was in a state of shock. He said, you need to be as fit and as strong as possible, because we know that post-operative outcome can be determined by how fit and healthy you are when you go in.
Yeah.
And so there was a kind of physical aspect of preparing for the surgery. I needed to get fitter and stronger. But also there was a lot, I don't know, well, a diagnosis of cancer can be really traumatizing. And because you don't know how severe it is at the beginning, you don't know how long you've got, you don't know what the future holds at all. So it really messed with my head. And so physically I felt a wreck. And psychologically, I tried to stay positive, and I was trying to be positive for my family. I have a young son, and trying to hold all that together. And then there were times where the catastrophizing would come into my head, and the anxiety and the worry and all of those things. And so what I found was that for the different types of symptoms that I had, both physical and psychological, that dancing really helped me in lots and lots of ways.
Yeah. Can you go into some of the ways that it helps you?
Sure. I mean, if we take it very sequentially, so I had the time where I got the diagnosis, and I was then, at first I didn't know whether I would know when the treatment would be, but I knew we were in a national lockdown, and I knew that there were no gyms, no dance studios open, and I thought surgery might be a long way off. So I used dance to get myself fitter and stronger. So I did a daily dance workout, and that was really good. So what I did a daily dance workout at home, and I could just gently raise my heart rate, get all my muscle groups working, and I could feel myself getting fitter and stronger. But one of the big advantages of that is that it also really helped me with, sometimes my mind would get full of catastrophizing. So I'd imagine, I'd start thinking about what would happen to my set at the time. He was 7-year-old. And I thought, gosh, what's going to happen if I die? How's he going to manage to live and grow without a father? And I'd have this real sort of sense of catastrophe in my head. Yeah. And what I found is when I was doing a really sweaty dance workout, I almost went into a kind of fantasy type world. And so I did a Broadway dance workout. Yeah. And in this Broadway dance workout, it was all to show tunes, and you could imagine yourself on stage, and it was very performative. And for that 30 minutes, I could have a complete, for about 20 of those minutes, my mind would be taken off the fear and anxiety associated with the diagnosis and what was going to happen.
Yeah.
And I'd be on that Broadway stage and I'd be dancing, and it would just feel, I'd have 20 minutes where I wouldn't be thinking about my son being left on his own, and I wouldn't be imagining what my wife would do. I wasn't imagining how the mortgage would be paid. You know, I wasn't, all of those things that are everyday kind of worries. And so that really helped. And then I got the diagnosis. And then when I saw the consultant, he called me in and he said, okay, this is, he said, you need to come in next week and have surgery. And I said, oh, next week, that's quite quick, isn't it? Given that we're in lockdown and wards are closed. And he said, well, you might not survive much longer. If we don't operate, then it's fairly acute. You need to come in and have that surgery. And he gave me the months. He said the number of months he said I thought I might survive. And that made me quite, that again messed with my head. And so I thought, well, gosh, I need to be positive. I need to be on it. But then at the same time, I need to be disciplined. So then I started doing ballet every day as well. So leading up to that, I would do a ballet class every day. And what I really found with the ballet is, because I've done ballet all my life, and that really centered me. And I had this sense of discipline and a sense of calm and a sense of being in control of something. Because some of the big problems of receiving a diagnosis, one that's could get out of control, is the sense that I had no control over that disease or illness. I didn't have any control over that progression of that. And so by using something as disciplined as ballet every day gave me a sense of discipline and control over my body, at least externally in my body and of my mind. And the other thing I hated was, you know, leading up to that first phase before going in for surgery, you know, every couple of days I'd be having things stuck in me or up me or down me or around me. So it was a really physically intrusive process. And I hated it. I know everyone hates injections and I hated it too. And so those two forms of dance just gave me time each day to give me some control. And when I had anxiety about having things stuck in me or on me or up me. And of course, then the dance gave me a time where my mind could be quite calm. And then I used that experience. So when I went into the surgeries to have those procedures done to me, then I could use them to try to get into that mental mindset of calm and breathing. And because, of course, as soon as you tense your muscles up, it's hard for needles to go in. It hurts. And if you can get into the habit of learning how to control your muscles despite the anxiety. So leading up to surgery, I used musical theatre dance and I used ballet as a way of preparing myself mentally and physically for surgery. And when I got to the point of going in for surgery, I felt kind of match fit, I suppose. I felt ready, as well as I could be. And then, of course, I had the surgery, and what they did in the surgery, so I was diagnosed with stage 3 bowel cancer. And what they had to do, they had to remove a 15-inch section of bowel, so quite a large section of bowel, and they removed the malignant tumour that was in that part of the bowel, and they took out about 48 lymph nodes, and because they were concerned that the cancer had spread to the lymph nodes, and they wanted to get rid of those that it had affected. And of course, that's quite intrusive on the body. You know, they go in and it wrecks your abdomen and wrecks everything. One thing the doctor had said to me was that the day after surgery, he said the physiotherapist will come round and we get you out of bed the day after surgery. And we want to get you home as quickly as possible because of COVID, but we can't send you home until you can manage to walk a lap of the ward. Empty. And so getting that sense the next day where the physiotherapist came around to get me out of bed, of course I was connected to, you know, drips, and I had drains for urine, and I had, you know, needles in all kinds of places. So I had the drips and drains, and I walked around the ward, and that was fine. But I couldn't walk very far. I mean, it was really just a shuffle. And the doctor had said, and then the physio said, well, you know, here's a set of exercises that you need to do every 2 hours. And so there were kind of leg extension exercises and some standing up and sitting down exercises. And they were really difficult to do at first. But after about the second day, they got really boring. I mean, they're really, really tedious doing the same thing every 2 hours.
Yeah.
So then what I did was to use different forms of dance to kind of jazz them up a bit. And so when I was trying to do my leg extensions and leg rises, then I'd put some groovy arms on and try to do something with my arms. And then when I could finally walk and I came home, I would then, every day I would walk from the front of my house where I was quarantining, my bedroom upstairs. And I'd walk from my bedroom down the corridor to the back of the house, then turn around and come back to the bedroom again, do landing laps and walk backwards and forwards up and down the landing.
Right.
And I'd play music and try to make those, I'd try to move the bits that didn't hurt. And I would kind of put some groovy style onto them to make them interesting and to dance them out a bit. So I look forward to the daily and hourly exercises.
Yeah. And music always helps, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah, the music was great. Music was funny because I got really emotional. And there were some bits of music that, I'd just cry. I'd just start crying when I heard different bits of music. The bits of music that I'd listened to or hadn't heard for years, I'd suddenly play them and the meanings would come out of the music. Yeah. So I had an emotional response, either really positively or really, negatively emotionally. But there was always a cathartic response to some music, which was really powerful.
Yeah, interesting that. And just going back to when you were saying that when you did the Broadway dancing and for 20 minutes you'd forget about all the how's my son going to cope and how's my wife going to cope and all that. And these things, as I know from my positive psychology studies, moments like that or periods of time like that buffer the negative stuff that's in your life. So your overall well-being was higher because of that, because stresses and worries and anxieties can obviously have a negative effect on your body anyway and your immune system, etc. And when you have these periods of time regularly, like you said, you were just only fantasy land and just really enjoying yourself, that would have been a buffer to counteract the times of anxiety in terms of how it would affect you, in your body as well.
That's a really interesting way of putting it, that buffering. Because I can relate to that idea of a buffer because I was also told that, it's good to be positive. So having a positive outlook will be helpful throughout the whole process.
Yeah. And
I'm a very positive person. But there were those times where it's hard to be positive. And for me, it was hard to be positive at 4 o'clock in the morning when I would wake up. That would be a really hard time to be positive. And when I started to ruminate or started to catastrophize. Yeah. So that idea of having a buffer is great because it does then protect you for when those negative, because it's exhausting. I mean, being anxious is exhausting, isn't it? Yeah. And you need a bit of a time where you can rebuild yourself again momentarily for the next bout of anxiety before it kicks in.
Yeah. So that was really great. So carrying on from after you came out of your operation, after you came home, so we went up to the dancing that you were doing, and you talked about the emotional release, and then what's next? How much more dancing have you done since?
Oh, well, every day since. I mean, so every single day I've danced. So what was interesting, the physio left me with some breathing exercises to do.
Right.
And again, they were really boring. Breathe in, hold your breath, breathe out, breathe in, hold your breath, breathe out. I mean, really, really dull. And so I started to use some Tai Chi. I think it's called, I don't know how to say it, Qigong or Qigong.
Okay.
Anyway, I don't know how to say that, I'm afraid. I'm sorry. But it's a kind of Tai Chi, and it's all based on breathing, but it introduces movements and breathing together. And so you do the movements on the breath. So at the very beginning, because obviously it's quite important for the lungs for you to do deep breathing after surgery. Yeah. And so I had to do this several times a day. And so I then decided to do it with some movement and just some basic arm movements. And it was really beautiful having arm movements on the breath. And again, it felt like doing a ballet port de bras, but doing it within a Tai Chi framework. I was learning something new. And then I practiced that daily as well. So that was, so as soon as I came out of hospital, I did the three things. I did the walking and the landings eventually so the first day I could only manage 5 laps of the landing. It's not very far, so I could just shuffle backwards and forwards 5 times.
Yeah.
And then I was doing the jazz arms on my leg extensions. And then for the breathing, then I adapted that using Tai Chi and started to introduce movement on the breath to keep me motivated and keep my body moving, which I loved. And then I built that up over time. And then eventually I started to do a bit of ballet, but again, only doing the bits that didn't hurt.
Yeah.
Because for the first 3 months, I couldn't do any lifting. You can't lift anything heavier than a kettle of water. And you can't, so I couldn't do any abdominal exercises for 3 months. And it's only been 3.5 months since the surgery. So it's all quite fresh still. But I am delighted now that I am doing my Broadway dance routine again. And so that was the first thing when I danced that full out. And I've been working on that. And then I've been doing lots of walking outside and some running outside. So that's been really important. And as you said, the music has been fantastic. The music's been great. So I started walking. So because eventually when I outgrew the landing laps, and then finally I was allowed outside, because I wasn't allowed outside for the first couple of months. I then walked outside, and I'd have music on, and I'd walk as fast as I could, or as fast as my stomach would allow me to. And that was really great. But that's where I had this emotional response to music, and I found myself in the middle of the street with tears streaming down my face, listening to a song. And it was amazing that certain songs just got me. And there's a song. Do you want to hear the song? I won't play the song, but I'll tell you about the song. Okay. So there's a song called The Devil Went Down to Georgia. And it's an old 1970s song. Yeah, and it's about it's a song about the devil who challenges this violin player or a fiddle player, and he wants his soul, and he says, "Look, I'm going to play you for your soul, and if you lose, then I get your soul." And this song just came on in a random playlist, and I just interpreted it. I know this sounds really silly, but I just interpreted the devil as being my cancer. And this notion that this cancer came to kill me, and I had to work hard not to give it my soul. And the first time I heard it, this interpretation then popped into my head while I was walking the streets, and it got me. It just got me.
It makes total sense. It doesn't sound silly at all. It makes complete sense.
Yeah, but you hang on to that, you see, because those things are never spoken about. That sense that it's not until you get over the really acute phase that I realised my wife had been very seriously affected by the whole cancer process, and we received lots of love and care from people, and she was carrying that. We've got an older son who's in his 20s, and we have a younger son who's 7, and the older son was carrying it too, but we didn't talk to each other in the really acute phase about the possibility that I might die. And but we're obviously all thinking about it. That's hard. So I think the wonderful thing about music and dancing, or music and movement, is that both of those things can create conditions for catharsis. And a purging of pent-up emotions and feelings. And of course, those pent-up feelings, they can eat away at you. We need an opportunity, I think, to let them out. Yeah.
And do you know much about, I suppose it probably be better to ask her one day, but do you know much about whether your wife used dance during this period as well to cope with things?
Oh, well, she has. Yeah, she's been using it a lot. And I didn't know, but on the day of my surgery, or the day after surgery, it was World Cancer Day.
Right.
And so when I was in hospital, I didn't know about World Cancer Day. And Lindsey, who's my wife, she decided at that time that she would do something for World Cancer Day. And what she decided to do was to do a a boogie for bowel cancer. So as she decided to dance every day for a year, and so she's using dance every single day as well. And so every day she does a dance and she puts it on social media, and people can sponsor her, and all the money goes directly to Bowel Cancer UK. And her aim is, she's now done just over 100 days. I think she's done 102 days so far, which is dancing every day. And then the aim is at the end of that, on day 365, which will be then, the next Bowel Cancer, World Cancer Day, that's when her challenge will end. So she's decided to use dance as a way to get herself fit and healthy, and to raise awareness of bowel cancer, and to raise some money for bowel cancer too.
Yeah, that's really great. 3 things in one.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Yeah. And then, so what research have you done, or what research have you read that explains, all these benefits of dance in your health?
Well, I think, as you said in my intro, I've been studying the science of dance for many years, and looking at the benefits of dance. And what we know from all of that research is that when we dance, then 4 amazing things happen. So dance has this extraordinary power, and there are 4 amazing things that it does. And these are the 4 things. The first thing is that it brings people together socially. Yeah. So we know that dancing brings people together socially. Yeah. I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. The second thing is, we know that dance and movement change the way that we think, and it helps us solve problems. Yeah. The third thing is that dancing changes us emotionally. We communicate our emotion through movement, and it can give us a cathartic release. Yeah. And the fourth thing that happens is that dance changes us physically. Yeah. And dance changes us in all kinds of ways physically, from our brain to our hormones, in lots of different ways. Let me tell you about each of those in turn. I mean, all of this comes from the kind of scientific evidence. Yeah. Now, if you want an easy way to remember these 4 things, the social, the thinking, the emotional, and the physical, is just think of the word step. Because they're under a step framework. So S for social, T for thinking, E for emotions, and P for physical. Excellent. And what we know is that when people move their body together, this is some fantastic research that came out of Oxford University, is that when people move together, they report liking each other more afterwards. And they report trusting each other more. They feel more social closeness towards one another. And the fourth amazing thing that happens is that when people move together in synchrony, then it leads to more pro-social behavior. So people are more likely to show pro-social behavior towards other members of that dancing group. Yeah. So now, this has been shown even in tiny, tiny, tiny children, in 7 and 8 month old children. Wow. So this change in pro-social behavior after being moved in synchrony with other people. So this synchronous movement has an amazing social bonding impact. Wow. Now, in terms of social bonding, of course, so that's the evidence for it. We know there's also evidence from Oxford University and other universities. The way we used that during my treatment was that, Lindsey and I we had a house to run still, and we had all this stuff going on, and we would dance sometimes together. We would just go and dance, and we'd hold one another, and we'd put music on, and we'd move together in synchrony. Yeah. And it is an amazing feeling when you move with somebody and have a shared sense of one another, that connection with one another. And so all of those things, increase in liking and the trust, having faith in one another, feeling more psychologically similar to one another in terms of your values and your fears and your anxieties, you share them. And the drive then to show pro-social and helpful behavioural towards each other.
It's a good way to get closer in your marriage. It could be a good beneficial tool for marriages.
Yeah, well, it is. It is. I did a thing recently with a couple. It was reported in the Daily Mail about them using dance. They had a marriage that was, they were becoming more and more distant with each other. They were kind of moving in separate orbits, even in the same house. Yeah. And we used dance with them to bring them together. Wow. And, it's amazing. So dance does bring people together. I mean, wouldn't it be wonderful if as a society, we danced as much as we drank coffee, and there were places in our social areas for us to dance naturally.
Yeah.
We've kind of sanitized our world from so much that we don't dance anymore. We're so ashamed of our movements. So the social element of dancing is really important. So we know that there's evidence to suggest that when you move together socially, it bonds people together.
Is there stuff about families dancing together? Have any studies been done?
Well, we know that there have been all kinds of, not so much about families, but certainly to do with groups of people.
Right.
And so there's a bonding experience with groups of peers. There's evidence to show that people start adopting similar movement patterns, the in-group, out-group behaviors. You have an in-group of people, then they start sharing their movements. They start moving in a similar way sometimes, and you can see those patterns of movement. And sometimes those movement patterns are there, then they bond people together, and it kind of emphasizes the in-group versus the out-group. So, there's certainly those. So you might think of those as being family-like units moving in that way, their identity.
Did you have many family dance sessions?
Oh, all the time. I remember that, I grew up in a very working class family environment, which was wonderful. We went on, my parents worked in a hospital, and at the time there was the hospital social club that everyone used to go to. And we used to go there. And what was wonderful about the hospital social club is that from a very young age, I remember dancing with my mum and dad and my sister, and there'd be a band playing, or there'd be a disco on, and, families would dance together. All the other workers, there'd be, in the hospital, there'd be the plumbers, the electricians, there'd be the porters, the nurses, everybody would be dancing together. Yeah. And there was a real bonding experience. But as a family, we used to do that quite a lot. All the special occasions, we used to go to the hospital social club, and we'd all, that would be our place to go, and we'd all dance. And then we used to go on holiday to places like Butlins. And at Butlins, it used to be amazing because there'd be there'd just be one big kind of ballroomy type place. Everyone would go to it, and there'd be entertainment. There'd be the red coats who have entertainment on. We'd all dance. We'd do things like the slosh and the giggles, but there'd be multi-generational dancing. So you'd have grandparents, parents, children. And I think one of the things I haven't been for years, but I think they separated all that out now. And they've got, discos for kids. They've got discos for teenagers. They've got tea dances for older people, which is a real shame that they're kind of separating all these different groups out.
Yeah, it is actually.
So that informal social dancing was a really important part of our kind of family bonding. That's a very lovely, happy memories.
Great. And do you do it with your family now, or have you done it through this period with your family?
Yes, very much so. So we dance together, and we have informal, my 7-year-old is now an 8-year-old, and he's very into having dance-offs, and he'll, we do. We have family disco nights sometimes, and our older son will man the DJ decks, and he'll be there, spinning grooves, and we'll all be dancing around to that. So it's an important part for us. And then my wife and I still dance together. Yeah. And, we do all kinds of different dancing together. Yeah, it's lovely.
Great.
Okay. How about you? Do you dance? Do you dance with your family?
Not with my family, but I dance as part of exercise, as I like to do walks as exercise. And I think, that's boring. So I sort of do dances instead sometimes. So sometimes I feel, I'm bored with just walking, or just doing maybe doing what conventional exercises, if you know what I mean, like things that people do in the gym. But I just think, no, I just want to dance. I just want to move differently as part of exercise. So
Well, you can. One of the things we're talking about was this idea that dancing changes the way you think, which it does. And one of the things we have to do is the improvisation element of dancing can be really stimulating for your creativity. Yeah. You say you're going for a walk and you'll get a bit bored of going for a walk. Well, you can mix them up. You could put some music in, and then you can just walk with a wiggle, and then work out which bits of your body you can move differently on the rhythm of your walk. So you walk now you can just start by, swinging your arms extra big. Sometimes you can do big arm swings, sometimes small arm swings. Sometimes you can get your shoulders rolling. There's all kinds of things you can do with your body while you're going for a walk, which will feel like dancing, and it stimulates your thinking and your creativity.
Wow. I know people won't be able to see this, but as Peter was talking, I just started sort of doing chair dancing. We're both doing a bit of chair dancing together.
It's infectious, isn't it? You have to get the groove on in your chair.
Okay. What was the next point we were getting onto?
Oh, yeah. So we know that when you move your body, it changes the way that you think.
Yeah.
And of course, some of the things to do with health and well-being is we get stuck in these set patterns of thinking about ourselves. We get stuck in those patterns of thinking ourselves as maybe being worthless, or maybe being useless, or maybe being incompetent, or we compare ourselves with other people negatively. There's a whole set of stuff that happens to do with our thinking, ruminating on the past, on the decisions we made, on the things that went wrong, fearing the future. Lots of those things. Now, of course, we know things like CBT and cognitive behavioral therapy is based on this notion of changing, reframing our thinking. But that's really difficult. Reframing our thoughts can be really, really difficult. And because we're stuck in these set patterns of thinking. And what we know is that when people move their body, it changes the way they think. And that then can lead to changes, and it helps them people find new solutions to old problems, or to find not just a solution, but to find a set of potential solutions. If you've got debt, for instance, let's imagine you're anxious about debt. You've got a load of debt, you can't afford to live, you don't know how you're going to pay your bills, you don't know where you're going to be living in 3 months' time. Your income doesn't match your outgoings. There's a whole set of, you think, oh my word, that level of anxiety can build up and build up and build up. Yeah. And of course, what you need to do, well, I'm not saying what you need to do, but one of the things one could do is start, thinking about, well, how do you think about different solutions to that? How do you separate your rational thinking from your irrational thinking? How do you change the constant patterns of negative thinking and come up with solutions to those problems? And we know that when people move their body, then it can lead to significant changes in the way they think, which then can be applied in those areas of anxiety and depression in the way that CBT would help people to do. But what movement does, it gives you the tools to unlock your thoughts so that you can then help you to think of new ways of thinking about the things that are going on.
It also sounds like when it's a CBT, the therapist usually asks the client, to think of a different way of thinking about things, so to speak. Whereas with the dancing, it's sort of, you're not having to think about different ways. It's sort of happening more naturally because you're just focusing on the dancing and just enjoying yourself. And then that's unlocking something, which just seems like a much more enjoyable way of coming up with a solution.
Because in many ways, you have to stop the thoughts first before you can reframe them. So two things I want to say. One is that we know when we ask people about dancing and why they dance and why dance gives them a health benefit, so many people say to me that when they go and dance, they stop thinking about their worries and anxieties, right? So it gives them a time off from those thoughts. Yeah. That's one thing. You need that as a base position. You need that time off from that thinking before you can start to really address it. The second thing I wanted to say is that several years ago, I suffered from depression and anxiety. And one of the manifestations of that for me was that I'd wake up in the morning, that time before you're fully awake. And I'd wake up, and for the first 15 to 20 minutes before waking up, my mind would be flooded with all the times I'd let people down, with all the failures, with all the disappointments, with all the uselessness, all of those things. And they could go back years. It'd be like 20 years ago, I stood this person up, or 20 years ago, I didn't follow through on this. People must really hate me because I'm such a useless person, going through that thing in my head. And so I went to see my doctor, and the doctor prescribed me some CBT. And I didn't get on with the CBT. My mind was already full, right? My mind was constantly full, telling me that I was useless and rubbish, and I didn't deserve anything, and that I was a failure, and I was worthless. And when I then had to go, the doctor said, okay, well, why don't you try reframing some of those thoughts? So I'd have the thought, which is, I let this person down 25 years ago. And then I go, well, Peter, is that rational? Is that a rational thought? Is that something that you think? And I'd had this conversation with myself. My head would get even fuller.
Yeah.
hopping back between, well, was it real? Was it not real? Did I really? Does it matter? All these kind of things for one thought, and it will go on for ages. And so I do believe that sometimes you need to switch off those thoughts somehow. And for me, dancing, and for lots of other people, dancing can do that. And the class I used to go to at Pineapple during that period of my life was a very loud jazz class. And I'd go into the jazz class and the music would start and I'd take a deep breath in, and it was amazing. My mind would just, there wasn't space in my mind to think about how rubbish I was or how useless or how disappointing I'd been to people during that time. And that was a really, well, I mean, it's like a breath of fresh air for the time of when your mind can be that clear.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. And I think these days, especially, we're living more sedentary lives. And I think we're actually created to move a bit more than maybe we are as a society. And I think that's a problem. I think because we're maybe not physically as active as we generally probably were meant to be, that can be having an effect on, like everything's just in your head, too much in your head.
I absolutely agree. I mean, I genuinely believe that we are born to dance. And rather than just being a kind of a romantic notion that we are born to dance, I think biologically we're born to dance.
Yeah.
Most of the brain is specialized for processing movement-based information. You're sending signals to our body, receiving other people's movement through our sensory inputs. They're perceiving movement either in vision or in sound or in smells. Those dynamic changes are all to do with movement with the air, movement with light. All these different things are movement-based, and our brains and our bodies pick those up. And of course, moving our body is a fundamental part of who we are. We're meant to move. But we've developed this lifestyle where we try to minimize movement in many respects. And we certainly try to minimize creative movement. If you look at any workplace, people are moving only as much as they're meant to do for the functional, utilitarian movement associated with the task they're doing. We're not allowed to run around, and we're not allowed to shake our tails like we're puppy dogs. We're not allowed to suddenly move our arms in an arch as we're walking down the street. We have to be sedentary. And I think that leads to lots of problems. And this is why movement has these amazing health benefits for people, because that's partly what the body was designed to do.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So is there any more regarding that? The second one, the thinking.
Oh, well, the thinking one, I think we kind of moved on from that. We know that when you move your way, it changes the way you think. But what's amazing is the different types of movement change your thinking. Or you might have to buy my book to read more about that. We'll tell you all of it. And I'm not making a sales pitch, I promise. I'm just saying that there's a lot to talk. So then the third one is the emotion thing. We know that when you move your body, it not only does it change the way you can express your emotions, but we communicate so much through our bodies. We communicate so much of our emotion. And people read our emotions by looking at the way we move our bodies. And we're communicating that in lots of different ways. And of course, that then leads to a bonding with other people again, because the communication can be, that can be really sensitive, that even when we don't touch anybody, to be in tune with their emotions through the way they hold their body or move their body is really important. And then, of course, as we've discussed already, the whole catharsis element of moving your body changes the way you express those. We get that with feeling anger. There's some great work looking at people who used to be people who were substance abusers, so people who were addicted to certain drugs, and people who then, so this was a study carried out in Glasgow in Scotland, and it was an amazing study for people who'd been drug dependents, and they were experiencing the highs and lows during that, at the time they were used to experiencing their highs and lows. And then they go to rehab and they get clean, and they weren't taking drugs, and that was absolutely fine. They weren't abusing alcohol or even using alcohol or drugs. And so from that perspective, they were fine. But the thing they missed was the opportunity to experience emotional highs and lows, because they suddenly were reporting that they were on this kind of monotone level where, a bit like when you're on antidepressants and you don't feel anything high or low, you just, well, not so much, you're just on this kind of monotone. And so some of these organizations set up Friday evening Zumba classes. And what they do is those Zumba classes is this kind of Latin style music, and they go into a hall, make it quite dark. And it was at that time, early evening on a Friday evening, where people might have been going out and getting their groove on. So then these former drug users had an amazing experience here, because they experienced an emotional high. They were able to go and dance, and the music was loud, and they were moving their bodies, and they were moving really, really getting a sweat on, and they found they got this fantastic emotional release. And sometimes they could be really angry, and they could let out this anger, and sometimes they'd be euphoric, and there'd be happiness there. A whole wide range of emotions were experienced during these classes. So it serves an amazing function. So dancing can, that emotional release is wonderful. And the final thing we know from dance, not the final thing, but the fourth element of the health benefits of dancing, are the physical benefits. I've done lots of work, as you mentioned at the beginning, working with people with Parkinson's. And we know that Parkinson's is a neurodegenerative disorder, which leads to a wide range of symptoms. There's some physical symptoms, and there are some quality of life symptoms, and there are some emotional symptoms and cognitive symptoms, or a whole range of symptoms. And what we know from the research is that when people with Parkinson's engage in dance-based activities, then it can lead to temporary but significant reductions in some of their medical symptoms. So these might be changed in their physical symptoms, like an improvement in balance, an improvement in physical coordination, walking, taking longer stride lengths, which are important. We know it leads to an improvement in mood. So we know people with Parkinson's show higher rates of depression than people without Parkinson's. And we know that when people with Parkinson's dance, then their mood change, their positive moods increase and their negative moods decrease. And we see changes in their problem-solving abilities. When, of course, you've got Parkinson's, you might have difficulty in chewing and swallowing certain foods. You might have difficulty finding a comfortable position in bed. And these, of course, are problem-solving activities, because, of course, then you need to use problem-solving to find new foods that you can chew and swallow without choking on them. And you need to find new ways of rolling over in bed to get comfortable. There's a whole set of things that are going on. So we know that the physical changes that happen with the body, with movement. And, of course, movement is fantastic. As you said, in our sedentary world, we stop moving. And then, of course, that leads to problems for our muscles, our joints, and our heart and lungs. And if we can get people moving, then it leads to improvements in those things. And we know that leading a sedentary lifestyle is a major killer. It's extraordinary. Lack of physical activity kills about 9% of people. Absolutely. And leads to all kinds of non-communicable diseases like cancer and heart disease and all kinds of horrid things.
Which is very sad.
Well, it's tragic. It's tragic in the definition of tragic, where tragic means, the extinguishing of hope. We all have so much hope in our lives. And, by being sedentary, we extinguish some of our own hope. And what's amazing about movement is that we can all change the way we move our bodies to a certain extent. And if we could change society so that movement was much more acceptable in our society than in our workplace and our education and our healthcare systems, then the world would literally be a much better place.
And we were created to move more than we are now anyway.
The human body it's there for movement.
I've really enjoyed this chat, Peter. Thank you so much. Really learned bits, and I've just really had a fun time.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me on. Thank you. I feel really honoured to be a guest on your podcast. So thank you.
It's been great having you. And I have to tell you, there's a video on YouTube that you did called The Happy Dance. which I found, and I've been trying to learn all the movements. It's a bit complicated for me. Well, I have to give it a few more goes before I learn it all, but I really enjoy that. And the scenery in that video is really good. I'd recommend people check that one out. Dr. Dance, the Happy Dance, really great. And it's only like a 5-minute video, but it's really great, and it's just lots of fun.
We were blessed on that day. We filmed it on the 29th of February, so it was a leap year last year.
Right.
And in the morning, we were filming in a church hall, and we had to stop filming at one point because it was hailing, and the noise of the hails landing on the roof was so loud we had to stop filming. And it was a grey, really windy, stormy day. And someone looked out at about 2:00 in the afternoon, and they said, "Hey, the sun's come out."
Yeah.
And so we said, "Let's dance on the beach." And we ran down to the beach, and it was just glorious. I mean, it was freezing cold, but glorious. And so we're very lucky. So it is a beautifully shot video.
Yeah.
We're very lucky to be on the beach that day.
Yeah, it is lovely. It made for a great video, having parts of it on the beach. Yeah, it was great. Okay.
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Yeah, I did enjoy it. Thank you very much for coming on the show, Peter. It's great having you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Wellbeing in the Kingdom. If you've enjoyed, learned from, or been inspired or empowered by today's episode, then please help to support the show by leaving a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts.